and riling people up, and then when people respond the way they did, lashing out at them. It's a twisted thing that happened in St. Louis by Bob McCullough that night. Plus, a lot of people have said that when you read the transcripts and the grand jury testimony from the prosecutors and whatnot, a lot of people feel as if Bob McCullough was somewhat Darren Wilson's defense lawyer instead of the prosecutor.
I heard that as well, that he put on more of a defense case for the cop than he did. A prosecutor, you want to get an indictment, right? The whole reason you bring a case to a grand jury is because you want this to go to trial. And he put on a regular case where there was a defense. In fact, they let the police officer get up and tell his view, we'll call it that, his view of what happened that night. Was pretty outrageous. Yeah. Did Micheal Brown get a chance to testify his point of view? Of course not. He's dead.
Absolutely not. That was part of the problem. I spoke with a friend of mine who's a lawyer in St. Louis, and she said she'd never heard before of a person who's a target of potential indictment being called before a grand jury and allowed 4 hours to tell their side of the story like that. And if you notice, there's this narrative that now exists out in the ethers that Micheal Brown never had his hands up. The forensic evidence is conclusive. There were jurors who testified witnesses who testified before the grand jury, and Micheal Brown never had his hands up. And that sort of meta-narrative has been allowed to take place because Darren Wilson, that's what he told people. That's what he told the grand jury when he testified before them for 4 hours. And that's the idea that Bob McCullough has also put out in the ethers. And when you allow Darren Wilson to testify, when he allowed Darren Wilson to testify for 4 hours, of course, the jurors on the panel were going to be sympathetic with him, and they were going to take, it seems to be, they took what he said at face value, because he was able there to tell his side of the story, but he put it cogently. Micheal Brown hasn't been able to tell his side of his story, and we don't know exactly what happened inside the car, because the only two people who do know, one of them is dead, and that's Micheal Brown. And then the night that the grand jury was announced, Micheal Brown's mother was out amongst the crowd. I was standing maybe 10 feet away from her. There were 3,000 people outside of that Ferguson Police Department that evening. And she broke down and collapsed in agony because she already knew, of course, there would be no non-indictment. And that's when her partner, her boyfriend, her fiance, stood up and shouted, "Burn this bitch down." And got some people in the crowd riled up.
Yeah, the testimony that the cop gave was kind of, I heard other talk show hosts, play it on their show and say, see, he had a reason to shoot him. Brown was the aggressor. Now, we know Brown's blood was inside the squad car because they found droplets of blood. So he was, when he was shot initially, close enough to the squad car for the blood to get inside the cop's car. Now, the cop says he reached into the cop's car and tried to grab for his gun. He said Brown was shot twice, from what I understand. Then he walked away. But then he came back at the cop in the car again, which is ridiculous. If you're shot, you're wounded, maybe dying, would you think in your mind, I got to attack that cop who just shot me again? And you have no weapon of your own? Or would you try to run away for your life?
The laughable proposition, because I know people who've been shot, and I just, as you said, I can imagine you've already been shot, but you decide to charge at the police officer, which is what Darren Wilson said. One witness who testified before the grand jury said it. It's important to keep in mind that most of the witnesses who testified before the panel, they all said, most of them, the majority of them, with the exception of 3 or 4, I think, all said that Micheal Brown had his hands up or was in the process of putting his hands up. And so there is no definitive conclusion as to whether Micheal Brown didn't have his hands up. But even beyond Micheal Brown itself, people of Ferguson and the people of New York, people of Oakland, Cleveland, they wouldn't be responding in the way that they have. These organized protests wouldn't be so persistent and consistent if this were only about one person. This isn't just about Micheal Brown. It never was just about Micheal Brown. I was listening to one of those idiots on cable news just hammering Micheal Brown and calling him a thug and all this and how the protests are based on lies. Protests are not takes some lives. Because whether Micheal Brown had his hands up or not, that doesn't do away or wash away the feelings, as I said, that so many people in Ferguson and all across this country have with regards to a racialized and in many cases anti-black police state that actively and disproportionately targets black people. That's what kicked off this whole thing in Ferguson, besides Micheal Brown's death, of course, which is that they feel as if the court system, for instance, is treating them unfairly. And one of the things that the reason I said that the riots were justified